Welcome to Ville's second webinar in our 30th anniversary webinar series, 30 Years of Community Support, the special relationship between L'Abri volunteers and residents. I'll now pass this along to your moderator, Ville coordinator, Michelle Mills.
For those of you who don't know me, but I know that many of you do and you have met me, my name is Michelle and I'm a coordinator at Ville. So today I just wanted to give you a brief outline of the schedule we'll be following for today's webinar. So first we're going to start off with who is a Ville volunteer. And then next we're going to look into how does it work. So our guest speakers will be Cathy DeChambeau and Grayson. And next, we'll be speaking about what is the context of volunteering at L'Abri today, especially during the pandemic. And we'll follow that with a special thank you to our volunteers and L'Abri community. And we'll end the webinar with a question and answer period. So Ville was formed in 1991 by Montreal English language faith communities in response to the urgent need for stable living conditions for people with mental illness. Their aim was to counteract the revolving door cycle of frequent hospitalizations or life on the street faced by discharged psychiatric patients lacking adequate social support. The group that started L'Abri was the Interfaith Social Service Planning Committee, representing 30 churches and synagogues in central Montreal. An important model in our planning was a West Island program called CARE. So CARE stands for Create a Rehabilitative Environment. The first apartment for 3 residents opened in 1991. And for the next 9 years, 1 apartment was added each year. The objective of L'Abri is to support persons with a mental illness to live with a decreased risk of hospitalization and to enhance the quality of their lives by providing a supportive environment. Above all, L'Abri wishes to help participants in the program feel that they have a home and ongoing support from volunteers and staff. So currently there are 10 apartments, all located in the west and southwest parts of the Montreal island. There is a small staff consisting of an executive director, administrator, and the 2 coordinators who visit the apartments weekly and provide individual support. And so central to L'Abri are our volunteers. So at L'Abri, we have various types of volunteers, including our residents who participate on the board, raise and manage their own activity funds, and of course participate in events and fundraisers such as the card sale, project, and the citrus sale. We have a volunteer board of directors, some who also double as apartment volunteers. There are special volunteers who help L'Abri and residents with various tasks, such as deliveries and leading activities. Lastly, we have our biggest category, which are our apartment volunteers assigned to each of L'Abri's 10 apartments. Volunteers can be task-oriented, helping with things such as meal planning, cooking, cleaning, or simply just being involved in social connections. So underlying all of these activities, volunteers provide much appreciated support that is often missing in our residents' lives. You see here this diagram beside us. So to speak to the fluidity between those 3 spheres and the long-term and unique relationship L'Abri volunteers make to our community and residents, here are testimonies from the volunteers and residents of one of our apartments.
Volunteer, and in particular with L'Abri en Ville, means being part of a community, and a community with a really valuable mission, and of not just providing housing, but providing a home and a supportive community for people living with a mental illness.
It's about it goes beyond a bit the role of being or having a volunteer. It's like having access to like a community network, like with normal people. You feel doing normal things. Yeah.
Friendly, and it differs from other volunteer organizations because it also never feels stale. The activities are always, they're very diverse, and they're constantly changing. So it always feels fresh.
Because I volunteered with L'Abri for so many years since it began in the second year. So it's become part of my life. It's like a family. Even when I was out of the country for a year and I came back, it just continued. So it's become part of my life. I've volunteered for other groups for different things, for maybe a single purpose, you know, one particular purpose in that group. But here, it's multi-purposes. It's L'Abri, I see it as a family. And everybody has different needs, and staying together as a family, you meet each other's needs because everybody gets something from somebody else. It's not a one-way street.
We'll now hear from long-term volunteer Nancy Grayson and recently retired coordinator Cathy DeChambeau, who will discuss the volunteer experience at L'Abri. Nancy and Cathy, would you be able to introduce yourselves for those who do not know you? Nancy, I suppose we can start with you first.
Okay, thank you. Well, I became part of L'Abri en Ville in 1997, having met Anne Reed at a party given by Sue Purcell. She found out I just retired and she immediately recruited me. And I started out on the board rather than as a volunteer. So I was on the board, and my volunteer every now and then fill in for a volunteer who was away. And it was always at the Benny apartment. And then a few years along the way, they needed another volunteer at the Benny apartment, and I was really ready to do that. And I feel like the Benny guys and I, we're good friends. That's what it feels like at this point.
And I feel I speak on behalf of the Benny guys and all of us at L'Abri that we're happy that you joined us. That you stayed with us as well.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing. And Cathy, I guess, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself, and what was your first experience like being with the volunteers?
Well, I was a coordinator, and I've been retired now for a year. Oh my gosh, time goes by so fast. And my first memories of working with the volunteers was with Susan, the office manager. And she always said, well, you got to get the tea ready. And we had a beautiful teapots, and we had our nice little china cups and the best cookies. Love working there because of the good cookies. And we would meet with the volunteers usually once a month or so, depending on their needs. And I remember meeting Nancy and Afric with the Benny volunteers. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe Nancy being a retired social worker and Afric being a retired psychiatric nurse. They just had so much wisdom and knowledge to share with me. So it made for a good learning for my first year there.
So to speak more, our volunteer Campbell and resident Francois from our Jolly Pearl apartment.
It's unique in a sense, in that my experience volunteering with other organizations has been always been helping with administration or with programs or with running the organization. Being a volunteer at an apartment at L'Abri en Ville means personal contact with people. It's much less being a volunteer than being a friend and doing stuff with friends. So for instance, we go to movies, less so now with COVID, but I'd also say that there's a much more personal dimension for me as a volunteer. I learn things from my friends, from other people, people who really have as much to tell me as I have to tell them.
On peut avoir des amis, ils deviennent des amis. Quand on a besoin d'aide, ils sont disponibles pour nous aider, pour souligner des moments importants comme nos fêtes, des choses comme ça. Ils nous font faire des sorties aussi. On a eu des sorties avec les bénévoles, avec Maxime Campbell. Campbell, j'étais voir des films souvent avec lui. Après ça, j'ai d'autres bénévoles, mais c'est une autre organisation, c'est l'entraide, Sarah Clark. Ils me donnent à manger, ils sont très gentils aussi. J'ai beaucoup d'aide d'eux autres aussi, là, tu sais. Mais c'est un peu semblable à ce que l'Abri fait, là, tu sais, les contacts humains. Puis, pour ce qui est de l'Abri en ville, j'ai bien aimé l'expérience avec les bénévoles qui a à l'entraide, tu sais. Ils nous ont beaucoup aidés.
Campbell and Francois spoke a little bit about the activities between apartment volunteers and residents and that special reciprocal relationship that develops from this. So Nancy, could you share a little bit about your experience with that and the apartment you volunteer with?
Absolutely, yes. Well, as it has been intimated, it's, you know, the helping and being a friend is not a one-way street. It's not always me doing things for them. It's them helping out with us too, with things that we need doing. And I remember at one point that Rick would take care of Anne Reed's dog when she was away. That kind of thing, you know, something needs doing, then they're there to help us too. So it's definitely a reciprocal relationship. It develops into that. It starts out, we're the helper and they're the helpee, but it turns around many times.
And Cathy, so as a coordinator, what was your role in these relationships? So they sound organic, but how does the organization and staff nurture them?
Well, we, over the years, we offered educational training programs. And I know when I first started, Dr. Fielding's lectures were really, really popular, and the residents and the volunteers really looked forward to hearing him. And I know some of the volunteers, they'd come year after year and to hear his talks. And then later on, Cheryl and I developed a training manual based on his lectures to help the new volunteers.
So thanks, Cathy, for sharing about the workshops that you organized and Dr. Fielding's talks. So volunteer Jim Cullen will now speak to the impact of those training sessions with Dr. Fielding and the volunteers and residents of the Bahama apartment. We'll talk about their connection and the important role destigmatization has had in their experience.
During about 25 years at Abri. And I started off to open an apartment on Madison. And second thing we did was meet with Dr. Fielding. And I want to mention him particularly because during his session for us volunteers, he drew a triangle board. He probably has done that again other times. He said that in this area for help and support in the community, for this group, we need psychotherapy, psychiatry, pharmaceuticals, and also in the other corner of the triangle, social support. And he went, "That's you."
A volunteer is someone who is there to share experience about his life and brighten your world when, for example, your family is far or you just don't communicate as often as you would like to. Our two volunteers presently at the Bahama apartment are Pepita and Julie. The relationship that we have at Abri with the volunteers is that they're really friendly. We're not numbers because mental health issues sometimes has stigmatization. So I really feel happy and very touched that they take the time to be with us sometimes.
Being a volunteer at Abri has been amazingly surprising to me. When I started, I didn't really know what to expect. And then I found out that this was a marvelous way of making new friends. And I've become friends with Evelyn and Alice and another fellow volunteer, Julie. And it's been a real gift. I also feel particularly strong about supporting Abri and being a volunteer for Abri because mental health issues have touched me personally, have touched my family, and I feel a connection and a need to be supported.
Having a volunteer, especially in the context with Abri, I think means having a resource, a connection to the outside community factor here. And I think it's very important to understand that most people, if you're touched by mental health in any way, which many people have been, a lot of times they go into it knowing firsthand mental health issues are at the forefront of L'Abri. So there's less concealing, there's more openness with regards to connecting, and it makes it easier to connect when you don't have to hide so much of your life.
L'Abri has differed very much from my other experiences volunteering. Previously, it's always been more like a kind of work, whether you're washing dishes or you're serving coffee or you're selling tickets, all very valuable activities, but very different from my experience at L'Abri. We become friends, and this is not work in any way, shape, or form. It's not a chore. It's a pleasure to be with all of these people and to be able to support each other through all of this time, specifically through COVID. It's been a very difficult time, and we've been able to support each other.
As we enter the last section of my conversation with Nancy and Cathy, I did really quickly want to let you know that Nancy and Cathy are going to be present for the question and answer section. So if you have any questions for them, the question and answer period would be the perfect time to do that. So the last speaker, a volunteer named Julie, she spoke about residents and volunteers supporting one another during the context of COVID-19. Cathy, I know you retired just before the pandemic hit, but in our previous conversations, you did speak about the longevity of volunteers' commitment to L'Abri, which has certainly helped them support one another through these difficult times. Could you share with everyone why you think that is?
Well, as everyone clearly said in the video, is it's a two-way relationship, and it becomes friendships, and it sustains and it lasts, and it's finding what people are interested in and sharing things together.
I definitely agree with that. That's a good point. And Nancy, what about you? What do you think?
We have kept up with each other on telephone, the Benny guys and I. And the other thing is when David had a birthday during the pandemic, and I picked up a cake and walked over to, I don't have a car anymore, so I picked up a cake at the bakery and I walked over to his house and gave him the birthday cake. And when I called the next day to see how that had gone, he said, the birthday cake is all a whole cake the three of them made. So I think they enjoyed David's birthday.
And I remember in a prior conversation we had, you told me a story about the last Christmas Hanukkah dinner, about when you had been sitting with Campbell and he had asked about your relationship with the board and how you came to be part of the board.
Oh yeah, well, Mark Laporta came over and sat with Campbell and me, and Campbell said to Mark, how do you know Nancy? And Mark said, well, she got me on the board. And Campbell said, well, she got me on the board too. And it was Maureen Ramsey and I both really who got Campbell who invited Campbell to be on the board, let's put it that way. And Alan Fielding also I invited because I was working in psychiatry, so I knew these people, and I started by inviting them to come and give a talk to the new volunteers, because we would have, educational sessions for the new volunteers whenever we had 5 or 6 of them. And that's how we started with getting these psychiatrists involved. And Alan Fielding has stuck with us, and so has Mark. And I think Warren Steiner was part of it at one point too.
So thank you, Cathy and Nancy, both for sharing about the reciprocal relationship and just your experience as a volunteer and coordinator. What's important is a history, the reciprocal relationship and how that works, as it is an essential part of L'Abri. But many of you might also want to know a little bit about how L'Abri has been managing in the present, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll now hear from Susan Powell and Terry Ann, who both touch on the volunteer-resident interactions during the pandemic.
The whole volunteer experience at L'Abri is a very positive one, particularly with things like the Christmas party or the volunteer dinner or outings. It's very enjoyable. Very happy being a volunteer for Labrie, and especially with my three girls, as I call them, ladies, because they're so much younger than I am. Unfortunately, the last year has been extremely difficult for all of us. I think both for them and for us as volunteers. I do really enjoy talking to them because it cheers me up, even though we can't physically get together.
Working with volunteers at Labrie has been very positive. They help us a lot, and we like to think we help them too. It differs from volunteer experiences elsewhere because they're in it for the long term, and so they are more committed. The Labrie volunteers are with us in good times and bad times. Each volunteer is unique, and they each bring something special to our lives. They encourage you to be the best you can be. They give you good advice and ideas. Especially during the pandemic, they break the isolation and give us support.
So as you can see on the screen, there's numerous pictures. So in these pictures, they represent some of the activities that were regular with Labrie residents, with Labrie volunteers and staff. This was all prior to the pandemic when, of course, in-person activities were allowed. So some of them are, our regular game nights at Gail Eakin's house, the El St. Bernard trip in the summer, the Cabana Souk outing, all of these different activities that unfortunately were canceled once the pandemic was hit. So now Vishaka Ratniaki and I, Vishaka is also a coordinator. We're going to talk a little bit about the coordinator experience working with volunteers and Labrie's adaptation to the pandemic and the many steps we've needed to take to get to where we are today. When you start at Labrie, something that a lot of people may not know is that you're given the Labrie telephone book. So in the telephone book, you have the names and phone numbers of all of the residents, all of the volunteers, the board members. I remember looking at all of the names and it was just black and white on this page. And I was thinking, how am I ever going to get to know all of these people and remember their names? My first experience getting to know the volunteers was going back to what Cathy said about tea and cookies, was hosting those apartment volunteer meetings. So I would email out the volunteers, host those meetings. The first big event that I participated in with Labrie was the annual citrus sale, which is Labrie's biggest fundraiser. I remember being able to meet a lot of the volunteers face to face there, including some of the volunteers who was assigned to apartments that I wasn't assigned to, who belonged to the other coordinator. So it was really a great way to meet different volunteers. And Vishaka, that was actually at the distribution, one of the two distribution days was actually Vishaka's first day at Labrie.
Yes, you're right, Michelle. So citrus sale was my first day of training. So where I got to meet some of the volunteers and some of the residents. But where I really got to meet all the volunteers was a Christmas party. So where Christmas party is one of the activities at Labrie, where you get to meet all the board members, residents, staff, and the volunteers. So we all share a nice meal together. So there I met all the volunteers. They came to me and introduced themselves. So that's the moment I realized how strong the Labrie community is. When I start talking to volunteers, Pete told me that whenever you need help, Vishaka, give me a call. So even though he said that, I was hesitant to call him. And I remember Star has to push me a little bit and say, yeah, go ahead and call him. So I called him, and it was a very heavy snow day. But he came to the Labrie office and introduced himself. And then he said he gave me his casual and to deliver an item to one of my residents. So this was really a good experience. And also for me, it was like how far a volunteer would go to help our residents. So it was a wonderful experience.
fast forward to March 2020, when the pandemic hit. I don't have to explain it. We all lived it. We remember it. But for L'Abri specifically, I remember at that point, everything was reduced to phone contact. All in-person house meetings, volunteer meetings, activities, everything was now by phone call. I remember Star saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. You're going to phone all of the volunteers. You're going to make a weekly schedule where the volunteers will contact the residents on a weekly basis. And this is something that was so important, just having that social, just to have that friendly phone call, because we have to remember that once the pandemic hit and everything closed, that meant activities for our residents, and not just L'Abri activities, but just all their weekly activities that they would participate in. So the volunteers, they really stepped up. They phoned, they stuck to their schedules, they phoned the residents. And one of our residents even made masks for all of the residents by hand, which they were incredibly so nice. They were really, really nice. So from there, we had a lot of obstacles and wanted to switch to virtual, as many places did as well. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had some of the residents who did have iPads. They did have smartphones. So some of them had access to Zoom, but not every apartment had a resident who had this access. I remember back in April, Vishaka and we started a short story discussion group that we held monthly. Vishaka led the French one, I led the English one. And so the individuals who were connected, they were able to join on that monthly basis. And then there, basically from April 2020 to August 2020, we were really focused on getting everybody connected virtually. In the summer, Star purchased an iPad for each apartment. So we now had the residents connected virtually. One of our biggest barriers was some of the residents didn't have digital literacy. So it was very difficult for some of them to be able to join activities and navigate Zoom, which were all now really big necessities. So opportunity actually presented itself in September. We were approached by the occupational therapy program at McGill to see if we would be interested in having OT students. So of course we hopped on that opportunity, and we had some OT students start in October, and they were able to meet with our residents, and they were able to get their input as to what they felt they needed help with in terms of digital literacy. And they were able to create user manuals. So at this point, we now had our iPads, we now had our user manuals, and everybody was connected. So we were now able to host virtual activities. So I guess, I feel like I've talked a lot. So Vishaka, why don't you share about kind of what our activities have looked like?
So 2 months into my position, so when the COVID hit, so everything went to virtual. So even though Cathy said like we had tea and cookies and before the volunteer meeting, but now everything is virtual. So this is where I really got connection with my volunteers, and this is how we got connection through the virtual meetings. And then when we had the meeting with our sister organization, we met one of the coordinators at Ankura brought the idea that their volunteers share their interest with their residents. So we picked that idea from them, and we asked you and I send the emails to our volunteers and ask what their interests are like. So there were a lot of ideas like giving exercise class, cooking class, or storytelling or something like that. So they came up with this idea. So we had so many ideas, but we had to reduce to 3 activities per month. You can explain the activity that you had.
I think our next volunteer, Pat, and resident Irene would be the best people to discuss the facilitation and the participation in L'Abri's virtual activities, specifically the soda bread making activity that took place on.
I'm a woman of age who has been involved in L'Abri since its very inception. It's been a very, very rewarding experience started with the organization of L'Abri and setting it up, and part of it was recruiting volunteers to work in the apartments. I actually didn't myself work as a volunteer, an apartment volunteer, until perhaps maybe about 12 years ago. It's been the most rewarding experience. I've been with the same apartment, Brasilia, for those many years, and have met most astonishing, remarkable women over the period of time. I just get so much more than I get from my association with them. Prior to the pandemic was a lot more fun, I have to say. Some people just love walking, and so we'd go for walks. Some people, I've gone cross-country skiing with them in years gone by. Some people just want coffee, and we'll go to interesting different places for coffee. But it's always fun because you see new places and you have conversation. The three residents have each had a birthday under COVID conditions, and so we've had Zoom meetings with all the volunteers and the residents, and that's good. The fact that many of the volunteers have been able to connect through Zoom has been a godsend. I had a lot of fun on St. Patrick's Day because I expedited a cooking class in how to make Irish soda bread. And it was great, good fun. I had to really adapt. I couldn't do it in my kitchen because my Wi-Fi is not strong enough there. So I was making soda bread in my living room, but that was all right. And I was pleased. There were a number of residents that participated, and it was just something different in it. And my hat goes off to you coordinators, because you have managed to stimulate activities through Zoom contacts.
My name is Irene. I live at L'Abri en Ville. I had a Zoom thing until L'Abri. I heard about it. That was all. Pat was there, and she showed us step by step on Zoom how to make Irish soda bread. So we made it, and a lot of people loaves turned out different, but they all were good, and it was really something. I'm going to make another one soon. We had the book club, poetry, we had music appreciation and everything. So it did us a lot of good. It's been almost like being there, except the person's not with you. You're seeing them instead of being with them. Because it also gave us something to do, because libraries and stuff were closed. It's been very rewarding. It's nice to see them, to hear from them, to have them come and talk to us on the phone, on Zoom and whatever. And they're very, very nice people. I really appreciate them all, and I thank them for their services.
So that closes up that section about where L'Abri is in terms of the pandemic. And we would like to share a special slideshow as a thank you to our community in recognition of the special relationship between volunteers and residents. And the slideshow is a thank you to those of us who are still with us, and those in remembrance who are no longer with us. So that wraps up our slideshow. And now to open our question and answer section, I wanted to start off with a video of Jim Cullen, where he's going to talk about something called a slow grace.
Community is a grace. It's not a construct. It happens. Volunteers and élan. Et je dis ça en français parce que c'était important pour moi de rencontrer des collègues en français, des amis en français aussi à l'abri. And volunteering is an energy, an élan. I like to read, I like to go for a walk, I like to drive, I like to go for a swim. And the Abri residents are like me. They like that too.
Jim, in the video, you asked if there is such a thing as a slow grace. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Well, I guess Maureen and I, when the last year or so, Maureen always says that this period has been one of waiting. So I guess what I meant was that we have to kind of sharpen our waiting skills. It's been a tough time, but good things are going to happen to us, and I'm sure that's what a lot of us have found over this period.
Thank you so much for sharing. And so with that, I think that would be a great time to start the question and answer section. So for those who have any questions for any of our participants, please feel free to either write your question down in the chat box, or you can use the little hand icon, raising icon, or simply raise your hand in your video screen, and we'll get to you and asking your questions.
When did we open our last department? I can't remember. Does anybody remember?
It would be 10 years after we opened the first one, I believe.
Yeah.
We open one every year.
I believe it would have been either 2000 or 2001.
It would be
I think it might have been LaSalle.
Yeah. LaSalle was the last one. What year that was, I don't remember.
Do you have another question?
It's not a question, but I would like to point out something that we didn't mention, and that is that we have inspired and helped other groups get started. They weren't called Ville, but there was one on the South Shore and in Ottawa, and so that's been another outreach thing that L'Abri has done.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. We spoke a little bit more about that in our first webinar, and in our fourth webinar, we'll be speaking to our sister organizations. But as you really did bring up a good point, where part of L'Abri's outreach was the creation of our dissemination guide. So that gave the opportunity for other organizations to follow the L'Abri model step by step in creating their own organizations. So for example, Ancora, Our Harbor, so there's there's about 3 who have been created. Les Trois de Mille as well, yeah.
And just also to say that the writing of that was largely done by our board members, like 2 of our main board members and volunteers, Eleanor Beatty and Audrey Being, were really instrumental in the creation of that guidebook. Along with, we had someone hired, but I mean, they played a big important part in writing that. A lot of volunteer work went into that.
Very, very good point.
I have to say, guys, I feel awfully that last video, there was some hiccups there in the technical side, because when I'd seen Jim's message and he kind of talked about the idea of community as a grace, and had asked if there was such a thing as a slow grace. So in the times where, if grace is seen through spontaneity or is realized through spontaneity, and we're kind of distant from one another, is there still a way for that to happen in a community? And I think, honestly, there's been so many good examples of that in the past year. And that's to you, that's all to you, to the L'Abri community, that you found the ways to do that. Thank you so much. And that special relationship.
I can remember painting one of those first apartments. Actually.
Yeah, so a little more than friendship.
Yeah.
Lots of, but lots of fun work. I have to say, I remember when we've done stuff like that, but we get, you know, many hands make light work, let's say.
There used to always be a blessing of the apartment. One of the heads of one of our affiliate churches or synagogues would come and bless the home.
Yeah.
Oh, Marianne, I'm just going to find your screen. I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask to start video. Can you see that prompt there, Marianne?
Hi. I just wanted to comment because I found that when we were approaching, in my time at Ville, when we were approaching volunteers, new volunteers, sometimes they would think, I wonder what I can do, what can I contribute? And the range of activities that volunteers did would always boggle my mind. From the simplest thing, for example, I remember there was a volunteer who used to call the apartment that she worked with and say, I have to drive to Walmart today. Does anybody want to go and pick up a few things? Very exciting, because when you don't have a car and you want to get big things, it was exciting to do. To very like creative things at the Lafayette apartment at one point. They were going each week or each 2 weeks to a different metro station, looking at the artwork in the metro station, reading about it, and discovering about the Montreal artists. And then they'd go out of the metro station, have a coffee somewhere, so they would see all these different areas of Montreal. And I even remember one volunteer going with a woman from Brasilia to the insectarium to eat fried locusts and fried cockroaches, because there was only one that wanted to do that, but it was somebody who did something very exciting. And so it was so wonderful and creative. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that. That's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marianne, I think one of the things that's been so fantastic too, and I see so many faces, I want to encourage everybody not to be shy and to, start your video and put your hand up and join us. I know that one of the things, because Marianne, you were my supervisor when I first came. And I thought it was just so fantastic that there was this delicate balance of giving the space where the volunteers found how they wanted to set up their own schedule. So some met weekly, some met, and did things every few weeks. Some just got together for special occasions. And then there was also bigger activities where one volunteer would cross over into multiple different apartments because they went driving somewhere. And it was just, it's really daunting when you first come to wrap your mind around it, but it really exemplifies that, many hands make light work, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's lovely. I've never seen it anywhere else.
And I was going to say too, just like Marianne was saying, the hospitality, which I think is connected to grace. There's a lot of hospitality, and the hospitality in the country. I'm not sexist, but I love meeting with all the guys in the country. All the guys would go to the country together, and the girls would go to another activity. But also there were colleagues that could sing, and colleagues that brought us together to sing. And also, yes, there were some, as we're saying, the wonderful talents of volunteers that are shared.
Did anybody else want to say hello, or?
I'll say hello.
Hey, all
I had a hard time finding my code because I got a new computer and I couldn't find the code and I was going frantic, you know, so I'm late.
Hi, hi, Marie Jose.
I see Dr. Fielding is with us too. Many thanks to you for all your support in the L'Abrionville resident and volunteer relationship. It came up many times in our work on this webinar.
I'm very touched, and it's you know, people say, oh, it's an honor and a privilege and that sort of thing sometimes. Actually, this is one of those ones where if I look back over the arc of being involved in projects that were meaningful to me, and remember Nancy, you know, pulling me in from when we used to work together at the Allen. This is one of the ones that really is very meaningful for me. You guys don't know this. When I'm teaching residents, I hold this up as an example. I hold it up as an example of small is beautiful, where you cloned yourselves instead of expanding to the point where you don't know people, about the power of affecting people's lives by being for them as volunteers. So yeah, you can also maybe know that I still use you guys as an example when I'm teaching residents about how to do it, and what's out there in the community that is still so astonishing for the help that you bring to people. So hats off to all of you for just amazing work, and wonderful to have been able to be associated with you all these years. And it was fun seeing that picture of a really young looking Mark Laporta, and myself in the background of a picture there a lot of years ago. I've lost the mustache in between, and things really changed, but that was fun.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and thank you so much, you know, for everything that you've done to support that resident and volunteer relationship over the years. Thank you so much.
I remember a apartment at the corner of Sherbrooke when you come off the highway, right at the corner. And every time we go there and clean and help with different things, and we played lots of games. But every time you went in, you had to hold your breath because the building was stink of marijuana. You know, there were people walking into the building, and it was all known that people in the apartments are smoking, and the whole smell of it. So you sort of gasped as you went upstairs. That was, what was it? I can't remember what it was called. The building was called. It was right at Sherbrooke, and as you come off the Carry Expressway, there's a building right on the corner there. And they thought about it. They were wondering, you know, maybe they should find another apartment. There were discussions about it. But if you breathe deeply, you came out sort of happy, you know.
That was before my time.
Before your time. It's a long time ago. I remember all the, some are not around anymore. I remember the residents. Bob Bassett was one of the people, and Sarah in that apartment. There are four of us. And we had a really good time.
They did close that apartment and move down.
Yes.
Monk.
Yes.
Hi, Maureen.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, Maureen.
It's so nice to see you. That was Addington, and that's why we.
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's it. Addington, right? Yeah. I remember that. And even some of the trips we took. We went to Cap Saint Jacques for the day, and we took food, and we're in the water and playing around, and so yeah, did a few trips around. They're funny, yeah. Remember having a party at your place, Maureen? You had quite a party once, and
yeah, we did.
Quite a few of us
We had some fun times.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else want to share any other remembrances or say hello, Maxine? I'm going to ask to unmute you here. Did it work?
I'm unmuting myself. Anyway, I just wanted to say hello and to mention that tomorrow is Gary Mack's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, Gary.
Happy birthday, Gary.
Happy birthday, Gary. Is he there? I can't even see him.
Yeah, he's there. We've got a good view of all three of the guys at the LaSalle apartment. Hi, guys. There you are.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Gary.
Alice, did you want me to unmute you? Okay. There we go.
Okay.
Hi, Alice.
Hello.
So,
Hello. So I just wanted to say that I'm really impressed by all the work that is behind Labrie and all people seem to be well educated and organized, and I'm really blessed to be here. That's what I wanted to say.
We're lucky you're part of the community.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. We're blessed to have you.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very good.
there are a lot of places that need Labrie. A Labrie.
Yes.
Yes. I've tried to, I ran into a friend, her dad in Jamaica. Her dad was a psychiatrist, and he had this idea. He died now. And she decided that she's going to open up this sort of thing, but she didn't know how to go about it. So we had a long talk, and she's started to work on it, and then came the COVID. But she really wants to set up this kind of thing in Kingston, at least to begin with.
Is everybody waiting to have their dinner right now?
Yeah. So
a little bit.
I know we've gone over the 6 o'clock kind of ending frame. So we'll wrap it up here. If there's any other questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me, Star, anybody by phone or email. We're glad to take any other questions. But all of that, now that it's all said and done, I just wanted to kind of close off by saying, Labrie has been around for 30 years, and a huge part of our existence and our success has been really through the dedication and the hard work of our volunteers. So I want to thank all of you for participating, all of the volunteers and everyone who's taken the time to both participate in and watch today's webinar. So thank you again so much for all that you do as volunteers and for taking your evening to spend with us.